Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and with the boys bowing out with one of the best season finales I've ever seen in a long time, we have a lot to talk about. Throughout this video, we're going to be going through the full final episode and discussing all the Easter eggs and things you missed. As always, there will be heavy spoilers here, and if you haven't seen the episode yet, then I highly recommend that you turn off now. Make sure you drop a thumbs up if you've enjoyed the coverage, and don't forget to subscribe for more boys breakdowns throughout the next couple of weeks. With that out of the way, thank you for clicking this, but let's get into the breakdown. Okay, so the finale opens on a video that aims to teach kids how to survive a supervillain attack at school. Throughout, we're guided by Homelander and Sheriff Ed Flanagan as they go through the 3 steps of lock, arm, and wait, or law for short. I think this is actually a parody of How to Survive a School Shooting by Lawson University, who recently posted this video online, and similar to what we see in the show, gave us 3 steps. These were avoid, deny, and defend, which is similar to what Homelander and co advise you to take. Now, you may remember that when school shootings were more prevalent in the US, that President Trump suggested arming teachers as a safety precaution. This is being carried across here, but as we know from what we've seen in the show, guns would likely be pretty useless against most of the supervillain power set. Similar to the Lawson University video, Homelander says that someone will be dispatched to help. However, whereas in the real world version it was the police, in the boys universe it's a quote-unquote hero. As we know from both the show and comic books, the Seven and Vought heroes are actually pretty useless when it comes down to it, and this has been demonstrated in the plane scene in which both Homelander and Maeve couldn't really do anything. This video also has a website link, however upon visiting this nothing comes up, which is a bigger letdown than my parents. Now things quickly pick up in the episode and we jump across to the aftermath of the attack last week. A national emergency is about to be declared by the president and he's authorized Compound V for use by the authorities. Now though Victoria Neuman states that it was Vought who carried it out as a coup, we actually learn that it was her behind it the entire time. Now Victoria Neuman is actually based on the comic book character Vic the Veep, who in the source material was a Vought puppet that the corporation were trying to get into the White House so that they would be able to overrule any potential laws that could be passed against them. By the end of the entry, it does seem like Vic is indeed going after the presidency, and we end with her getting appointment in Congress, much like AOC, who the character is satirizing. You might remember that in our episode 4 breakdown, we mistakenly said that in the comics Vic the Veep was a soup himself, and it's kinda crazy that that mistake actually came true in the long run, as it's a massive diversion from the source material. I was sure that it was Cindy behind the attack, and she'll likely be coming back in the 3rd season to potentially expose what Vought were up to. I should have really guessed it was Victoria, as Amazon even reached out to me about 4 weeks ago asking if I'd be up for interviewing her after the season, as she was going to be part of its ending. It seems kinda obvious looking back that they were gearing her up to be something important, but hey, I'm pretty stupid. Maybe you should have been watching someone else's breakdowns, but it's too late now, we're at the finale. No, but you'll likely want to know what Vic's plan was this entire time, and if we piece it all together, it seems like she wanted to get V released to the public through the means of escalation. Because of the soups, Vought clearly had an advantage over not only the public, but the government itself, and thus she carried out this false flag attack in order to make it seem like Vought was behind it, so that the powers her end would receive V. Now that her congressional race has gone to plan, she will likely gain access to far more of this stuff, and will also have a say in who gets it and who doesn't. Stormfront's plan this entire time was to give it to a certain group of people so that she could create a master race, and I kinda have the feeling that Vic will also be selective in who gets it and who doesn't. Recently, there's been a lot of talk that this once almost central show has been leaning heavily to the left. However, I do think with the overarching plot motif of this, that it's shown everything simply isn't as black and white as we would believe. Vic takes out Alistair O'Donnell at the end of the episode, and this is likely to gain access to the blackmail material that the church has on Vought, so that she has one more thing that she can hold over their heads. At no point in the series have I really seen her as the villain, and it was a nice surprise to see that she was actually the Emperor Palpatine to this entire thing, without the obvious foreshadowing. Now we discover the Pentagon has an order in, as well as ICE, the organisation that are tasked with maintaining the US border. There's definitely a feeling of increased military might, and we watch Becca escaping the Vought facility before we cut immediately to the army patrolling the streets in SUVs. Annie is also wearing a camouflage t-shirt, and though very subtle, I think it's subliminally lacing the scene with a lot of military iconography. That's a complete reach, I must admit. Now, Annie gives her mother her goodbyes, and she gives her a cross necklace in exchange. This of course has ties to her past, as well as her comic origins in The Young Americans, a Teen Titans parody of which she was a member. She journeys back to the boys' base as we see them prep to take down anyone that comes into their path. Mallory has tasked them with getting another witness that can bring down Vought from the inside, but they see that as pretty pointless and just want to mow down the soups. Annie asks for one day in which he can get someone else, and she heads out with Huey to get help from Maeve. A Fleetwood Mac in concert t-shirt can be seen on Huey, and this is following on from the motif of his Journey Japan 81 concert from last time. The character has of course also worn several items related to Billy Joel throughout the season, and so far 5 of his songs have appeared in the series. These include Pressure, You're Only Human, We Didn't Start the Fire, and the entry this episode, Only the Good Die Young. I really hope that isn't a reference to Stormfront as well, which also just so happens to be the name of an album by Joel. We actually learn why Huey holds the artist so dearly, and aside from having complete bangers, it was also his mother's favourite singer. She's not dead though, don't worry, she just left when he was 6. Now, who knows if she will actually pop up again, and if you have a theory on why she left out of the blue, then let me know in the comments below. Now, if you cast your mind back to the first season, Huey was actually talking about Billy Joel to Robin before she was completely flattened by A-Train. I think that he may constantly go back to him because the singer reminds him of a time before his life went to hell. Back at Vought Tower, we see the wreckage left in the aftermath of Black Noir vs Starlight. The room is being reconstructed, and we learn that Noir is unresponsive, meaning he might be a vegetable, but it's hard to tell which. Hey, you know, another joke I appreciate. Now, I actually have a theory that Noir might become the first soup who is revived with Compound V, and that this will turn him into a zombie-like character. In the comics, V was actually capable of bringing the dead back to life due to it firing up the neurons in the brain, and this left the person on the receiving end of it in a zombie-like state. Vought paraded the person around and lied to the public, telling some wild comic book-like story about how they'd come back from the dead, and this was to make it seem like their superheroes were invincible. I can see that sort of being carried across with Noir, and I would love to see this riff on the comics, as it does seem like they're moving away from what happens to him in the source material. Homelander comes to the conclusion that it might have been Edgar behind the attack last week, and Stormfront says that he's pretty smart, especially for his kind. This further shows how she views other races, and she also states she has a solution to stop certain people getting V. I think that this might be a play on the final solution from the Second World War. Annie and Huey arrive at Maeve's and ask for her help, but she rejects their plea to testify against Vought. She does end up saving the day later on, but because Vought are not publicly brought down by someone speaking out, it doesn't seem like their reign will be ending anytime soon. So yeah, Homelander, you can just keep on doing what you want, I guess. Now at the Church of the Collective, we see the meeting that Adana mentioned last week with Vaught's CEO Stan Edgar. He refuses to have a fresca and calls it awful stuff. Though we still don't know what's going on with it, I think he probably knows what's really up with the drink and thus doesn't have any of it. The pair discuss the Deep getting back in the Seven, and we learn that after the church rebuild the image of a fallen soup, they get a cut of the profit. Eagle the Archer likely didn't want to be part of this, and this is why he was cast out after speaking with his mother on the matter. Edgar accepts the Deep, but denies A-Train's return, stating that bringing back one is redemption, whereas accepting two would be seen as a weakness. This line later appears in the episode when A-Train is accepted back instead of the Deep, and the roles are reversed. But why does he get taken back exactly, and not the lovable character, the Deep? Well, after overhearing this meeting, namely the part that Stormfront's racism is the thing stopping him from getting back in, A-Train hands over the files on her to Huey and Annie. They use this to expose the character, and Vought would have obviously removed her had what happened not happened. At the boys' base, Becca arrives asking for help, and she's given a lovely French baguette. Billy calls out to Edgar, and ends up meeting him to discuss getting a hold of Ryan, so that the company have something to hold over Homelander's head. In the comics, the contingency plan for the antagonist was actually Black Noir, and if you want to learn more about the ins and outs of this, then definitely check out our video on the character, which will be linked at the end. Now Ryan does get taken at the end by Billy and the CIA, and thus this is likely why we see the character choking the chick into the city. They actually do a great job of showing how attached Homelander becomes to his son, and back at Vought Tower he decides to spend some quality time with him. We actually get a lot of father and son moments in this episode and see a completely different side to the villain. At several points I even forgot that he was a complete psychopath with the ability to burn everything around him to the ground, and deep down I kinda wish he was my dad. Now, after being swarmed by fans, he actually puts Ryan before his image and also sits down and discusses how he was filled with fear growing up too. It's by far the most vulnerable that we've ever seen him. I think Anthony Starr deserves a lot of praise for how he handles the character in this episode. I also love how Ashley's hair is still falling out from all the stress, and we first saw this on the set of the Seven movie after Homelander tried to do some damage control for killing an innocent bystander. Now back to Edgar and his plan, and I think it's probably the thing in the show that I have the biggest problem with. I'm not sure it makes that much sense, and it seems like it was always going to go one way with Stormfront. Looking at things in hindsight, Edgar hired Stormfront because he knew she would make people angry, and thus they would want Compound B, which would drive up the company's stock price. I think that they could have just brought in someone to do the exact same job without her trying to create her own master race, and the super terrorist threat would have driven up the need for V anyway. Edgar has had to bite his tongue as she slammed the company, and he states that lashing out is a white man's luxury. Thus he needs Billy to do his dirty work, and the two agree to separate Ryan from Homelander so that Vought can come in and pick him up. Billy ultimately betrays Becca's trust, and this does lead to her death, which I think the character is going to have to live with. He swears on his brother Lenny's soul that he won't let Ryan grow up with Vought, but a lot of the tragedies could have been avoided. You also see Kimiko folding to Arizarus. Definitely butchered the pronunciation on that. Anyway, in Japanese culture, these are meant to represent the carrying of one's spirit to the afterlife, and it is likely that she's done this for her brother who was killed by Stormfront earlier in the season. Cut to Homelander's wood cabin, and you might remember that this appeared earlier in the series when he was pleasuring himself. He tells Ryan about the first time that he was in a crowd, and also tries to get him to use his laser on a figure of the deep. Stormfront fills his head with the idea of white genocide, which is a conspiracy theory held by extremists that believe other races are trying to wipe out whites through infertility, higher abortion rates, and the end of white immigration. Ryan believes what she says, and I think this is a comment on how children are not born prejudiced, but they tend to grow up that way after being influenced by elders. Just as Ryan is about to use his hate to burn the deep figure, Stormfront gets a notification that the truth about her has been leaked to the web, and she flies away to Vought Tower. Just in the way that she used the internet as a weapon against Vought, the internet has struck back, and there's several memes and videos about her that bring her public image down. With her out of the way, the boys enact their plan, and using supersonics they set off high-pitched frequencies which infect both Homelander and Ryan's hearing. I think this is a reference to The Dark Knight Returns, and in that, Batman actually used a supersonic gun in order to momentarily disable Superman so that he could attack him. Homelander flies out to find the source of the sound, and Becca rushes to Ryan, which I think is where Billy has a change of heart. After seeing the two together, he decides to leave behind the phone that Vought security are using to track them, and he tries to send the pair off to Mallory. However, Stormfront arrives, and Homelander goes back to the cabin to find the Vought team there. He quickly works out what's going on, and decides to enact laser eye surgery on people's skulls, massacring them all. Now, the fight with Stormfront is not only awesome, but it also has several callbacks to the comics. Kimiko says that she's going to stick her boot up her Nazi kitty, and in the source material we watch as Stormfront literally gets someone's foot up his arse. Stormfront also states in the work that he can't be blinded, and this leads to the female, aka the comic book version of Kimiko, brutally blinding him. It massively messes up his eyes, similar to what we see here. However, it is changed slightly, and it's Becca that does it instead of Kimiko. Now, I loved seeing the character starting to resemble her comic book counterpart, and this reveal was probably my favourite part of the episode. They also pay off the girls get it done joke in an amazing way by having Maeve join the fight, and we see as they stomp her out in a scene that's very in line with the original work. In the forest, Billy, Becca and Ryan run for it, but Stormfront catches up to them. After she pins Becca to a tree, Ryan unleashes his laser beams which completely rip both women apart, sadly killing his mother. It's a big death, and it kinda brings things back to the status quo. In the comics, Butcher's wife was actually dead, and thus this death here lines up more with the work than the reveal at the end of season 1. In her dying moments, Becca makes Billy promise her that Ryan knows her death isn't his fault. Throughout the season, her biggest worry has been that he ends up growing up like his father, and in the supplementary material on the show, we did learn that Homelander killed his quote-unquote mother when he was a child. Now Homelander was raised in a lab, however he gravitated towards a nurse that he called his mum, and one day he accidentally broke her spine by hugging her too hard. It's likely the straw that broke the camel's back, and Becca needs to know that the same thing won't happen with Ryan. Homelander arrives and finds Stormfront looking like Anakin Skywalker and speaking German. I don't speak German myself, so I have no idea what she says, but let me know if you do, as I am quite curious to know. Now, we don't actually see Stormfront die, and it could also be possible that she returns in an almost zombie-like state down the line, as we haven't seen the full extent of what V is capable of. That probably won't happen, but you never know how the shows can go. Now Ryan sides with Billy, and Homelander is completely broken by the revelation that his son doesn't love him. Just as Homelander is about to rip him apart, Maeve arrives with the footage of the flight the two refuse to save, and she uses Homelander's ego against him. Homelander doesn't have a weakness per se, but when discussing the character, Anthony Starr stated that his need to be loved was what drove him, and this fragility means that he can be controlled. Maeve will expose him as the monster he is, and though initially he doesn't seem like he wants this to happen, by the end of the episode, I kinda get the feeling that he doesn't really care anymore. Now I do believe that the blood on his face and the confrontation with Maeve is actually a reference to the comics. In the original work when Homelander killed her, he had a similar looking face, but I think they flipped it here as many people, including myself, did think in the trailers that this was going to happen at this moment. I was also going to put the Stormfront thing as the thumbnail over this, but didn't really want to spoil anything, so you kids that see my videos before you watch the episode, you better bloody count yourself lucky. Now Edgar publicly denounces Stormfront, and she gets the blame for the attack at the hearing last week. We also see Annie back in her former costume, and you may remember that she was forced to change it. In the comics, the corporation wanted to sex her up a bit, and thus they made her show more skin, but the fact she's back in the more formal one does hint that things could be heading in a new direction. At the church, Alistair reveals that he knows the Stormfront leak came from A-Train, and because of this, he's been let back into the Seven. Again, the Deep is absolutely hilarious in this scene, and he steps back from the church after they say he's not allowed back with the group. They further hammer home the church and Scientology connections by saying he had to marry some weirdo who gives terrible jobs, and they also have the Deep mention that the religion believes they are space spores, which mirrors Scientology and the Thetan levels. Annie and Huey meet at a park bench and discuss their relationship, whilst also going into what path the future will have for them. The iconography has been echoed throughout the series as well as the comics, and benches have been a central meeting place for the pair. It's a really somber moment, and we learn that Annie will try and change things from the inside at Vought, whilst Huey will start to work for Victoria Neuman, which we'll get into in just a bit. Billy says goodbye to Ryan and then hands him over to the CIA. All the charges against Billy have been dropped, and Mallory has been put as the head of superhero affairs. She asks if Billy wants to work with her, which will likely be what the third season centers around. Mother's Milk returns to his daughter with a giant penguin toy, Kimiko and Frenchie agree to go dancing together, and pretty much everyone gets a happy ending. We catch Homelander standing on the cries of the building, giving his all to New York. And though this is a strange scene, it's actually sort of playing on the comics. Though not as graphic in the source material, there was a point where the character sat overlooking the city, saying "I can do anything." Now, bit of trivia here, but this scene was actually meant to be in the first season, however it was cut by Amazon for being too over the top. I don't know why they had a change of heart, but I'm glad that they allowed it back in, as it's the perfect way to say goodbye to him. You can actually read the description of their cutscene online, and it does seem beat for beat exactly the same, though in the original version it had the context of coming after Stillwell had just put him in his place. So yeah, good to see it here I guess, and we end with Huey working for Newman after she's appointed in Congress. I think going forward, Huey will unearth that she was actually the one behind the super attack, and because of her position in society, he will be forced to go on the run once more with help from the boys. Homelander obviously wants to take her down too, and it's going to be really interesting to see how things head out from here. We also see her banner which says "For the People," and this is of course because she's got V for the people, but whether that turns out to be a good thing or not remains to be seen. Now we also know that the Seven are short a few members, and though A-Train is back to replace Shockwave, it does leave things up in the air for what's going to happen to Stormfront's replacement. Well, after the public learned the truth about her, I think that Vought will want to balance out her origin with some all-American justice. This will lead to the appointment of Soldier Boy, who's a hero that's basically just satirizing Captain America. We already know he's confirmed for the 3rd season, so I think it makes a lot of sense that he will slot in the place of Stormfront, and also slot in the place of Homelander's butt. Spoiler alert there. Anyway, that's the episode, the season, and our breakdown, and I just want to give a huge thank you for all your support over the last month. I've seen a massive amount of comments and subscriptions, and it's made doing these breakdowns even easier, so I massively appreciate it. As I said, we still have a lot to talk about, so make sure you stay locked to the channel for more boys coverage before we move on to The Mandalorian at the end of the month. If you missed out our video on the Black Noir theory, then definitely check it out after this, as there's just so much to talk about. If you want to support the channel and get to see content early, then please consider clicking the join button below. You can also come chat to us on the Discord server linked in the description, or Heavy Spoilers on Twitter. Thanks for making it until the end of the video. You've been the best, I've been Paul, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.